Welcome, Sarah. I'm really excited about getting together with you today to invite you into my inspirational speaker series. And to frame this for the people who might be watching, one of the reasons that I've set this up and that I'm now developing it is because I really want to bring people who I know have interesting stories and do great work in the world to share those stories and to really give their reasons for why they do what they do. Because I believe that storytelling is a lost art and brings us a tremendous amount of riches into our lives. And the more I do my own work as well, the more I'm starting to realize that many of us human beings struggle with the same problems, the same beliefs, the same kind of limited sense of self, which usually comes from our core conditioning as children. And so in my work, and I work a lot with Sarah, I really love to go back to those original core wounds and bring healing to them by shining a light on them and giving people permission to really speak their truth. So today I'm introducing my very dear friend Sarah, who is also a colleague and a peer, and we have our individual practices and we also do a lot of work together. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So I'd really love to, because obviously I know all about you. I know what you do. I know a lot about your story, and I know how transformative it's been for you. And there's going to be a lot of other people out there in the world, women and men and any shade in between as well. You know, many of us are more than just dual gender and identify in many different ways around our sexual essence and our sexuality. And I know that you see that a lot in your work. So what I would really love to do is just invite you to maybe just tell a little bit about the story of how you got to be a sex and pleasure coach and why you think that's important in the world. But we'll start with the how. How did you get there?
Cool, thank you. Well, it certainly wasn't discussed at my career service as an option. When I was at school, it was not on my radar whatsoever. And in fact, through my teenage years, I actually struggled with sexuality. I mean, like most of us, had zero sex education and just just having no conversation in my family, no one to talk to about it, and feeling a lot of shame around the sexual feelings I was having as well. I was confused. I was having all these sexual feelings and then feeling like enjoying them, but then feeling the shame of not knowing what to do with them and things like sexual fantasies, all sorts of things. And that progressed through a series of not very healthy relationships where I felt worse about my body, where I felt more confused, more shame. And it got all the way through till my late 20s, where I just was approaching my 30th birthday. And I just had this sort of just reflection, as you often do before big birthdays. And it was like, I don't like my body. I'm not happy with who I am. I was numbing myself out on addictions and drinking, smoking, all sorts of things. And I was scared of sex, but I couldn't quite understand why, but I just knew I had to do something about it. And one of the other areas was I actually just thought my genitals were disgusting. And I really thought there was something wrong with me. So I remember flicking through the back of Cosmopolitan and seeing an advert for labiaplasty, which is genital reconstruction. And I thought maybe that's my solution. And, you know, so I was I knew I had huge fear around this area of my life as well. Like I would not, no one would be able to help me. I was the only person feeling these sort of things. But I just thought, just before my 30th birthday, this has to shift. I was doing a lot of personal development at the time, but everything was being talked about, but nobody ever mentioned the word sex. Never was it mentioned, you know, and everything else was freely spoken about, but I knew it's where I had to go.
Yeah, you've actually already identified two very important strands to the work that you do and the purpose of this series, which is the one is the fear around speaking your truth. So you're sitting on all of those feelings, that guilt, that shame, that self-disgust, the comparison about your body because we don't know what it's supposed to look like because of all the conditioning and the ideals. And also the second one is the ways in which we kind of self-medicate from that inability to speak the truth by turning to addictive patterns and behaviors. And that can come out in so many different ways, as we both know. So what was the point for you, the tipping point then, in recognizing all of those things, realizing that you're looking in the back of this magazine for labiaplasty and considering that? Was that a shock to you? And what happened?
Yeah, it was an absolute shock. It was like, I'm actually thinking about cutting off a body part. What's going on? And I thought that was a sort of turning point of, I've got to get some support. But I just didn't know where to go to. I didn't feel like the doctors was an option, because I didn't feel like I had anything medically wrong. And a therapy just didn't feel like the right option for me. So I ended up in Waterstones looking through the self-help section on books about sex. And it was there that I found a book about Tantra. And just something in that book resonated with me. And I started browsing on websites, and I found that there was going to be a workshop just up the road from me a few weeks before my birthday. So I booked on that workshop, and it was terrifying, utterly terrifying. However,
the thought of it, or the commitment to it, or the experience of it was terrifying?
The thought of it. And so, for example, when I got there, I parked my car right by the entrance just so I could get in and leave quickly if I needed to. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Yeah. And the workshop itself was deeply challenging, but also it was like coming home, that here was people who understood what I was going through, that I wasn't strange, that I wasn't abnormal. And no wonder I'm having so much fear around this area of my life, because of how society is. So it was hugely liberating, and that was a real pivotal moment for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I'd also like to mention here that that's how we first met. We connected through Tantra, and there are many ways, and I've heard this a lot since, that people arrive at something like Tantra. I used to run a juice bar before becoming a self-employed freelancer and independent, and I had bookshelves there with books of interest that people could come in and browse. And I remember putting a couple of Tantra books there, and somebody came in and started talking to me, and then she stepped onto the path of Tantra. And similarly for me, I knew I had some healing to do for different reasons to you. And after exploring all the different ways, I knew it wasn't going to be head-based that would carry me through this. I knew it needed to be embodied. And many of the Tantra schools really work in a very embodied way, taking you into the beliefs and the traumas that we store in our systems and in our bodies, but via the body. So using the site of the trauma as the resource to heal the trauma, if you like. So, and of course, not everybody goes to Tantra because they're recovering from trauma. There's a million reasons why people might want to step into that. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that experience at the beginning of your journey translated into where you are now, which, in my opinion, you're a leader in your field, and that sense of leadership in this field is growing all of the time. And the work that I see you doing is vital, and I've seen it evolve over the years. So you've now obviously brought in things like Taoist practice and other practices as well. So what was the bridge that connected these two very different parts of your life together?
So it's just been an incredible few years. I mean, it was 15 years ago when I first did that very first workshop. And after experiencing that and it just making sense, not in a mental way, but just a knowing way that this was where I had to be. And even though it was scary and terrifying, was something just kept going in me, just keep taking the step forward, keep taking the step forward. And at the time I was thick with addictive behaviors. I was in a job where my soul was just like, couldn't, in corporate career where I was not fulfilled, or my creativity wasn't fulfilled in any way, shape or form. And so I had a lot to unpick and unravel. And then as I started exploring my sexuality, but it was more than that. For me, Tantra to me has been a whole path of healing and self-love. And it's sexuality as the vehicle that we use for that, but actually it's just a small part of it. So it was about getting to know myself. I mean, I spent years trying to be somebody else. So it was about accepting this is who I am and starting to find ways to love myself.
Mm.
As I went on that exploration, people just started to notice the difference in me because it was so tangible. And then people started asking me for advice, and people, because there's so few channels, especially way back then, so few channels for people to go to get support around sexuality.
Mm.
And then I started just having conversations with people and actually just seeing just the tremendous power in just having an open and honest conversation around this area of our lives, and people feeling that they have a space to do that and to share where they can't share with partners, maybe even with friends and family. They can't share.
Usually with friends and family, I'd say, you know, for many of us, very difficult.
Absolutely.
But so many people who have absolutely nobody. Actually, I just want to backtrack slightly there, because you touched on something that really resonated for me, which is Tantra was actually the first place that I discovered my relationship with the breath, ironically, because I'm now a breath worker. And actually, when you said it was so much more about sexuality, really, for me, what the beginning of that journey was, and using Tantra as the framework, is a journey into presence, and a journey into being able to voice what you want, what you desire, what you need, and what you feel without those stories and attachments to shame, guilt, and fear. And both of us on that journey have heard so many people expressing, you know, from the depths of their being, the sorrow that they've carried for years, or the guilt that they've carried for years, and been absolutely stunned to hear that so many others share similar feelings and similar stories. And so would you say that, you know, this is kind of like a core aspect of your work, that you're kind of dispelling some of these myths around sexuality?
Yeah, phenomenally so. You know, no matter what arena I go in, whether it's a Tantra arena, whether it's a women's group, whether it's one-to-one with clients, no matter what gender, you know, the majority of people approach me because they're having challenges. And so, and with that comes, one teacher called it the 3 biggest STIs: shame, guilt, and fear, that exist in the world. And all of the you know, so it's so, and how we learn to do sex is so limited. You know, we learn through maybe picking things up on porn or the movies, or we may be fortunate enough to have a good lover. But most of us learn such a limited view of what's possible. And so we build up lots of myths around how sex should be. So for example, a really common myth is I should just know what to do, and I should be good at it. And we don't have a culture of practice when it comes to sex. Actually, like anything, if you want to learn to play a musical instrument, if you want to learn to cook good food, there's certain people that just really are gifted at that from birth. But for many, many people, we have to put time into practice to cultivate it. And so just that myth alone, when I share that with clients, can be just like, oh gosh, yeah, you know, that makes such sense. I say to people, if you go and see a band at the MEN Arena, they put hours of practice in to play that concert, yet we're expected to show up in the bedroom every time and produce the amazing concert without any practice. So there's so many myths that shape how we feel we should do sex or an intimacy. So it's one of the first things I do is busting those myths. But another big factor is also we're not showed how we're not taught how pleasure works, how our pleasure works. And pleasure itself comes with a whole load of guilt and shame. And just learning what's possible when we're present in our bodies for our pleasure is another huge part of what I do.
Really interesting points being made here, because also there is a very real danger in this field, that Tantra can be held up as this ideal. You know, people suddenly think that they've got to aspire to a certain kind of connection and sex, and maybe that isn't right for them, and then maybe it's just another thing to feel that they've failed at, really. So what I love about your work is that you really bring it down to the day-to-day experience that people are having, and just encourage them in a very sort of extraordinary and ordinary way at the same time, to learn how to practice, how to find the courage to say what works and doesn't work for them, and also for many people, how to identify that in the first place.
Yeah, it might be the courage to say, I haven't got a clue what I like. You know, and I just want to say something about what you shared about, because I think at the moment there's been a huge explosion of sexuality teachers and courses and books and everything in the world, which on one level is great and wonderful. But there's a big thing at the moment about the multi-orgasmic woman, and the multi-orgasmic goddess and all of this sort of stuff. And what women are coming to me and sharing is then they feel that feels so unreachable to where they're at, that it stops them engaging with it because they think they'll be the one that will never get there, or they feel the shame that they're nowhere near that. And so for me, with the majority of people, it's about actually how do we just learn to have more pleasure in the future. All that might come, it might not. But it's about finding for me, it's about, you sort of spoke about speaking your truth. It's about finding the sexual expression that feels authentic and true for you. And, I do feel people try and fit in a box that feels like the latest thing, but actually it's just really what's true for you. And that could be absolutely anything. There's so much possibility, and that will change as we grow potentially as well. And as we meet new partners or we age, all sorts of different factors come into it. Our sexuality is ever always evolving.
And it does, it's something that we've all been doing since time began, obviously, because we're here by grace of that, because we are the product of our ancestors. I've just been looking into ancestral lineages over the weekend at one of my retreats, and how did we get here? We got here through sex, and for some that's pleasurable, and for some it's definitely not that. But we have more freedom in many ways. Well, certainly you and I do, and the people within this culture on some level, to be able to start looking at what it is that brings us pleasure, and what it is that we really want, and we've all got different libidos, and we've all got different desires. So I think what you've just named there in saying, there's this sort of aspirational sexuality. I posted an article recently on one of my Facebook pages about the dark side of the goddess, and kind of how this new wave of stuff is coming out that's all about the kind of love and light and the flowing skirts and the divine feminine. And for many of us, it's like either we don't feel like that, we don't want that, or we haven't got a clue what it means. So it's kind of like, let's bring this back to your day-to-day experience about what gives you pleasure, and what gives you pleasure and brings you into closer balance and harmony within yourself. So what would you say are the most common things that you hear in your work, Sarah?
Well, I think I'd just like to speak to what you've just shared, actually, about bringing balance and bringing it back to the day-to-day. Because so often people that come to me are really stressed. They're feeling totally pressured with time. They don't have space in their life to do what they love, and that's often put on the back shelf. They're not feeling at their optimum health, all of these different things. So that how do we have pleasure in the bedroom when all of that's going on? And so actually often, or they may be totally self-critical, a whole load of things that can be impacting their lives. And actually it's like, well, I say to people, no wonder you don't feel like sex when you've got all that going on. And that, even hearing that, is such a relief. They feel that they should be the Superman, Superwoman, and want to be sexual even with all that happening. And we have to look at what's real in their life. But it might be, I have many clients that actually go on a whole journey of health and healing in terms of, well, how do I look after myself? How do I sleep better? How do I eat better? How do I create space in my life, start to say no to things and find better boundaries? So that's sort of often some of the work I do before we even get to the sexual side of things. But in the terms of the sexual side of things, I think there's a number of sort of things. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, people have specific sexual concerns, like they maybe feel they can't orgasm as they'd like to, or for example, they struggle to get erections, different things like that. Which are common. But also another thing that I see that's not talked about hugely is just general sexual confidence. They're just lacking in confidence, and that may be because they've had a bad breakup or some negative sexual experiences, or they haven't had any education. Then also another aspect is people just have a sense that there's got to be more in this area of their lives. So they come to me because things aren't quite right, but they just don't know why. And they're curious, so they feel there must be more. And that's fantastic. What a gift to feel that. So it can be because of catalysts in their lives. It might be, what does sex look like after menopause or childbirth? Or what does sex look like with a new person because I've been with someone for 20 years? So there can be those life catalysts, or quite a common one I see is like when a parent dies, and it's a big wake up of, what am I doing? I've maybe been in a sexless marriage for 10 years. Do I want to do this for the rest of my life? So there's many different reasons people might come to see somebody like myself. But also some people come because they just go, I know that I want to learn, about this area of my life. I had a couple yesterday. Sex is good, but they want it to be great. And they just know if you want to invest in learning piano or whatever it is, you get somebody in who can support you with that. And they want to invest in their relationship and go out and see what's possible and learn new things.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I relate to many of those examples that you just gave, actually. So, so you work with couples,
Yep,
and individuals,
yep.
And any age limits anywhere?
The youngest client I've had is 16, and the oldest, who came along with permission with their mum, and the oldest client I've had, she was 78.
Amazing. We're all dealing with this our whole lives,
Absolutely.
For many of us, we identify sexual feelings when we're very, very young, and we haven't got a clue what they are, and there's a beautiful innocence in it. We just know that it feels good, and then we get chastised and we get punished, or we get told it's dirty, or we get given the messages of our forebears and our parents and our teachers and whoever our influences.
Yep.
And on that note, actually, because I think influence is a big thing, both the negative influences that we carry and the positive. Are you particularly influenced by anybody in this field at the moment? Where do you get your inspiration?
In terms of teachers?
Yeah, teachers, guides, mentors. Who shows up in your life and brings you that inspiration to key into pleasure, information, teaching?
There's so many wonderful people out there. So, I mean, gosh, where to start? There's a woman I really love at the moment who I'm following a lot, is a woman called Kimberly Ann Johnson. And she's just speaking a lot of really, she's one that's really speaking her truth, and she's synthesizing what she sees in the world in such a fresh way. And she works a lot with women in childbirth, and she works a lot with trauma, and she's amazing. There's Celeste and Danielle, a couple of amazing sex coaches in America who I've been following for years and done some work with. There's all of the sexological bodywork crew, where they've just brought through such incredible pioneers in the world. People like Esther Perel, who's the world's top couples therapist, is just an amazing inspiration. Yeah. So there's so many great teachers out there. There really is.
There's actually probably way too many to name, isn't there, in this kind of arena, who are doing incredible work, and some of them who've been doing it all their lives. What's Betty Dodson known as? Is it the grandmother of masturbation?
Yes.
Something like that. Yeah. And it's kind of actually let's reframe all of these things so that we start to come into. I mean, I never sat very well with this term self-pleasure that's used a lot in Tantra, because it always felt a bit naff to me, but probably just because I was unfamiliar with it, and it's kind of like, if you just break it down into its most simple meaning, pleasuring of the self can come in any way, a luxurious bubble bath, or lounging out on your sofa and giving yourself half an hour to recuperate and regenerate, and go back to what you said before, the importance of removing all of these things that are stressors in our lives that stop us being able to access what we're really feeling and what we really need, and that's where our work segues together so beautifully, I think, because of my background in detox, and then, kind of both of us on some level or other having experienced chronic stress or burnout. And we're both quite high achievers, so I think that can be a big tendency. And then, it's kind of like, okay, I'm just going to keep focusing back all the time on the simple day-to-day acts of making this experience spacious and pleasurable. Yeah. So any future plans, courses, retreats, anything that you want to talk about and share with our audience before we finish? Because I feel personally like there's a whole load more that I want to ask you. So I'm really sure that we'll be doing another one of these, maybe with a specific focus, but this has been a great introduction into the how and the why you do what you do.
Fabulous. Yeah, I love that. And I just want to say a little bit to what you just shared around pleasure. And I feel that actually, for many people, that is a practice, is how do we allow more pleasure into our lives? And it just can be little bits of pleasure. So for example, a woman I was working with, because we talked about pleasure in a workshop, she felt she had permission. So instead of listening to a podcast about work, which was actually really hard work and not what she wanted to be listening to, she put on music when she's on the train on the way home, and just, how that lifted her spirits. So it's not even about adding more to our to-do list. It's about just doing what we do, but doing it differently for many people. So I just wanted to mention that as a little takeaway. So in terms of what's coming up, well, I've got lots of things coming up. My website is sarahrosebright.com, and I've got different events on there, and Steph and I are doing another amazing retreat later this summer. I teach jade egg practices. I'm going to be doing a couples workshop later this year. And I've got an online course for women called, which is about foundations for our sexual and erotic life. But the thing I'd love to share more than anything is in June, I'm going to be launching a brand new online course called V Life, the V standing for vagina. And it's a course that's, birthed really through my own life experience and some challenges I've had, as well as some joys and amazing experiences. Because so many women I see have don't either like or they even find disgusting their own genitals. And so this course is bringing together, but even if you love that part of your body, it's about how to really love and care for this area of our bodies in terms of pleasure, how to guide others in the pleasure we want as well, because that can be a real source of challenge for many women, but also how to look after our pelvic floors, because there's so many health conditions out there that are totally preventable, like incontinences, prolapses, and different things. And what I find is that women are overwhelmed with how to get started. So I'm really I've pulled together sort of a real course with some excellent information that can help women to develop a practice in this area. Because if our pelvic floor is weak, not only does it affect our health, but it affects our sexual functioning and our sexual pleasure as well. So I'm going to be doing a series of podcasts and things on that. So watch this space, or sign up to my newsletter, and I'll keep you posted about it on there. But I'm super excited about it.
Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. The V Life sounds super exciting, as do many of the other things that you are sharing. So anybody listening, I'm going to be putting a link to Sarah's website down below on the information part of my YouTube page. And all that remains for now is just to say thank you so much for being such an inspiration in this field and in my life. And I look forward to speaking more, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a total pleasure.
Stay juicy. Keep speaking your truth. Yes. And more pleasure, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Bye.